welcome back into another episode of the NHL Update. Alongside Nick Vernesi, my name is Dylan Clark. Today we'll be discussing specifically the Canadian teams, and there is huge news that we want to get to right away. The Colorado Avalanche have traded Matt Duchene as part of a three-way deal to the Ottawa Senators. And Nick, talk about how huge that is for the Ottawa Senators.
Well, for one of the things with the Senators they've struggled with over the past couple of years is trying to find offensive depth. Obviously, in a small market sandwich between two giant markets in Eastern Canada, it's hard to find the right players that can mesh on an offense like the Senators have had lately. They have Mark Stone, they have Mike Hoffman, and they made a surprise run to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. But this is a trade that, even though they gave up a decent amount in return, we'll get to that in a sec, they got another big-name player and got rid of Kyle Turris, who... While he was valuable in some capacity, Duchene is someone who is an offensive leader and a high draft pick, so his potential to do big things for a team that has limited weapons like Mark Stone and Mike Hoffman, that should really help Ottawa moving forward, especially since they're trying to make it to the finals this year.
Right, Ottawa now has that number one center they've been looking for. Kyle Turris is more of a second-line center, and Kyle Turris went to the Nashville Predators. Like I said before, it's a three-way deal. Turris will play a second-line role there with the Predators, but the main focus is Ottawa has a number one center now. Duchene will play with Mike Hoffman and Zach Smith for the game that is actually going on right now, the NHL Global Series in Sweden. And not surprising, well, I guess that kind of is surprising, Duchene playing his old team in his first game with his new team, Colorado and Ottawa, facing off in Sweden. And it's the first international game, first regular season international game in a long time, right, Nick?
Yep, first one since 2011. The funny thing about this game, the one that's going on now, it would be playing in Denver right now. So Duchene would be making his Ottawa debut and probably be getting booed by the fans in Colorado because of his desire to want out. Not the case. They're playing in Sweden. Last time there was a regular season game outside North America, you had teams like the Kings, you had the Anaheim Ducks, Buffalo Sabres. They were playing in Finland and Sweden. Now, we say the first regular season game because this preseason, the Vancouver Canucks and LA Kings played a couple of games over in China. So it isn't completely new, but it is new as of 2017. So two teams playing in Sweden. Both teams just so happen to have captains from their native country, Sweden. Gabriel Landeskog and Erik Karlsson. That might have had something to do with which teams would play there, but definitely a big step in the right direction for a country that is loaded with NHL talent.
Right. We're looking forward to these two games in Sweden, and I know all the fans in Ottawa are looking forward to the season to come, now with Matt Duchene at the helm of their offense. And right now, the Ottawa Senators, they're third in the Atlantic Division. Sticking with the Atlantic Division, we bump up to second place, the Toronto Maple Leafs, 10-7-0 to start the season. And it really isn't a surprise. We saw the Maple Leafs they surprised us last year with a huge offense and a decent playoff run. I mean, it ended in the first round, but they did much better against the Washington Capitals team that was far better than they were. And not surprisingly, they've done another good job starting off this year.
Their offense, what can we say? Even with sophomore slumps from Connor Brown and Mitch Marner, the offense has been on fire. Like, the only team that with a better offense than the Leafs right now is Tampa Bay, and they are way ahead of everybody in the Atlantic Division. I'm pretty sure they're the best team points-wise in the NHL right now. The Leafs, the problem is, the reason why they've gone from almost undefeated to now 10-7 is their defense is just not keeping up with their offense, like not even close. Frederik Andersen was a big pickup last season, struggled coming out of the gate, and then he figured everything out later on in the year. He's having a hard time. His GAA, his goals against average is over 3.3. That's not a good look. And the depth that the blue line has, but outside of Morgan Riley, it's not showing up so far. So as of right now, Austin Matthews, he missed Wednesday's game, and they won anyway with the likes of Naz and Kadri. But the defense needs to figure things out because eventually teams like Boston, teams like Ottawa, they are going to get hot and could potentially pass Toronto, and they could suddenly find themselves in a similar position as last year, fighting for a wild card spot in April.
Right, Toronto off to a great start this year. Now look at the NHL Super 16 rankings. Last week, Toronto was ranked at number 8, I believe. Now they're in ninth. So they've dropped a little bit, and it's really nothing to be overly concerned about if you're a fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Just they haven't been doing as well over the past week as they had been before. Again, there's a lot of hockey left to be played, so I don't think Toronto's a team that needs to be worried. But a team that should be worried right now, I think, in my opinion, the Montreal Canadiens. They have not been anywhere near where they need to be. They have not been anywhere near where they have been, and it's really raising a lot of questions: is what is wrong with the Montreal Canadiens?
Well, where do we begin? The offense, their preseason offense was non-existent. It was that bad. But now, along with their mediocre offense, Carey Price is just not looking good. My Vezina prediction is just into the trash. He would basically have to be pretty much untouchable if he wants any chance at winning the Vezina, considering some of the other names that are dominating the NHL right now. Having said that, they have done a lot better of late with Charles Lindgren, who wasn't even on the roster during October. He comes in, he posts a shutout, and the Canadiens win 3 straight. They've basically removed themselves from the divisional depths of Florida and Buffalo, but then their offense just boots it again on Thursday night in the loss to Minnesota. So their offense, they're inconsistent. Their defense, we'll see if maybe Carey Price can put things together now after he recovers from his injury, but not a good look. But there is still potential for them to come back with offensive weapons like Jonathan Drouin and Brendan Gallagher.
Right, and we've seen this in the past. 2 years ago, last time Montreal missed the playoffs, Carey Price was injured for a considerable amount of the season. Mike Condon steps in, plays a decent amount of games, and he played very well. So maybe we'll see the same thing with Charlie Lindgren. Carey Price won't be out for that long with this injury anyway. If he happens to have another one, we'll see if Lindgren gets the call again. But I think it's another instance of Montreal relying too heavily on their goaltender. And this isn't just an issue in the way they play. It's an issue in the way their whole organization is structured. There's not enough depth up front to counteract any shortcomings on the back end, really. And moving now over to the Winnipeg Jets, 8-3-3 to start the season, second in the Central Division, far better than anybody would have expected. And in this case, it's their goaltender again, Connor Hellebuck, who was brought in as a backup. I mean, he's been there for a while as a backup, and he's really burst onto the scene as a starter. 8-0-2 in his first part of the season here. And what's really, really surprising about that is Steve Mason was brought in from the Philadelphia Flyers to be the starter, and he's only played 4 games, and he hasn't won a single one of them.
Yeah, and there's a reason why he hasn't won any of those games. He really has not done well at all. First game, I think first day of the regular season, gives up 7 goals to Toronto, which doesn't look as bad anymore because Toronto's offense is good. Then the very next game, goes to Calgary, gives up 6. And Calgary's offense is near the bottom in scoring this year, at least to start off. So bringing in Hellebuck was almost a necessity because, 13 goals in 2 games just isn't going to cut it. And Hellebuck, he has yet to lose a regulation game, which that's pretty much top notch. And his stats go to show for it. He's at 2.12 goals against average. That's not far behind the current leader in the NHL, which is Corey Crawford. So it might be a little premature to have him as a Vezina candidate just because he hasn't exactly had enough experience to maybe reach that point. But I will say, if he continues playing like this, we're going to be forced to throw him in there because he's been that good.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree with you. It is a little early to make predictions like that, but it's easy to see that his play gives his team tremendous confidence, and it just, everything follows suit. They're playing fantastically. Nikolai Ehlers and Mark Scheifele leading things on the front end of things, 7 goals each, and Patrick Laine, he's got 5 goals in his second season in the NHL. And he said it himself, that's not quite where he wants to be. It's subpar as far as his standards go. But I think that's a good thing that he's calling himself out, and he knows he can do better, and he wants to do better. I think there are only good things in the future for the Winnipeg Jets.
And this is nothing new for Laine. Back when he was drafted 2nd overall by the Jets, he said how much, during the draft he talked about how grateful he was to be drafted by the Jets, but he also, before the draft, he talked about how he was disappointed that to potentially be drafted 2nd behind Austin Matthews. Looking back, Austin Matthews is that good of a player, but Laine has high expectations. He thinks he's good enough to be one of the best players in the NHL, and he proved that last year when he scored 40, or almost 40 in his rookie season. So it's maybe a sophomore slump, but it hasn't hurt the Winnipeg Jets at all. And if he figures things out, you're looking at a very good chance that Winnipeg makes the playoffs.
Right. And other teams that may be making the playoffs this year, again, it's early to tell, but the Vancouver Canucks, they're doing far better than they did last year, similarly to the way the Jets have been playing. They're right now 8-6-2, third place in that Pacific Division. And it's no surprise if you look at the way Bo Horvat, Brock Besser, and Sven Baertschi have been playing together as a line. They've been their entire team, really.
And that's huge for Vancouver. You're talking about a team that is Henrik Sedin, Daniel Sedin, and they're almost 40 years old. You need to have younger players who can come through because they're very clearly a rebuilding team. They have no business on being in the playoff picture right now, but that's exactly where they are. So you got the three that you mentioned. Brock Besser had a hat trick against Pittsburgh. That's not going to go unnoticed. But along with the improved offense, we're looking at a defense that is in the top 5 in goals allowed, as in the 4th fewest in the NHL. And it's not hard to see why. Jacob Markstrom has been one of the more consistent goaltenders in the NHL. That is a huge improvement from his struggles with Florida and then to Vancouver. And then Anders Nielsen, he's the backup, but he's really stepped up in his limited chances. He, I think, at one point had 2 straight shutouts. I think this might have been late October. And when you have 2 goalies that can come up big whenever you call upon them, you're going to win games, and it shows in the standings.
Right. We've seen a lot of times this year, it is more important than a lot of people expect to have that good goaltending combo. You can't sleep on your backup. You know, we've seen, and specifically in the Pittsburgh Penguins, Antti Niemi did not do well at all. He would be put into the situations, the back-to-back hockey games, and the Penguins get blown out. And you know, they bring in a guy like Tristan Jarry and really rights the ship a little bit. But in the case of Vancouver, it's great that they have such confidence in Jacob Markstrom as well as Anders Nielsen. And now we'll take a look at Calgary. Jaromir Jagr's back. That's always a good, right?
Yeah. He had 2 assists in his first stint with the Flames. Then he went on the IR, came back, first goal of the season against the Detroit Red Wings. To be fair, it was an offensive onslaught in that game. And that had a lot to do with one of Jagr's line mates, Johnny Gaudreau. Had an off year last year, but he still led the team in points with 61. And now he's on pace for over 100. I don't think that's going to hold up because Johnny Gaudreau is a fast player, tends to look more towards assists during his short career. And I would not be surprised if he ended up settling for maybe 80, maybe 90 if he really turns things up. But this is a team that is a lot more balanced in terms of offensive production. Monahan is the one that gets the goals, but you also have the 3M line, who really stepped up last year. Backlund, for most of the season, led the team in points. And then Matthew Tkachuk, he was a 6th overall pick. He exceeded expectations rookie season, and he's done just fine during his sophomore season.
Right,
So,
and if you take a look at the back end of the Calgary Flames, you got guys like Dougie Hamilton, TJ Brody, Mark Giordano. Their defense is really, it kind of flies below the radar some of the times, but it's a huge part of the reason why they're sitting at 9-7 in that first wild card spot. And again, there's room for improvement, obviously, but as far as the Calgary Flames have played over the last few years, this is certainly a general improvement from where we've seen them.
Yeah, and that was their goal of the offseason. They wanted to have one of the better offenses after going from one of the worst in the league to maybe middling last year with 2 average goaltenders. So they have plenty of defensive players that maybe they're not racking up the points as much as people would like, but they're certainly doing a good job at keeping the pucks away from Mike Smith. Now, as we segue over to Mike Smith, hasn't been great in terms of stats if you look at his stats on paper, but he's certainly been a big part in keeping the Flames in games because, like I said earlier, their offense just has not stepped up overall, and Smith has been a big reason why they've won so many games, especially in extra time. The problem is he started every game this season for the Flames except for one. He's 35 years old. He's not durable enough to play, say, 75, 76 games. You look at Cam Talbot last year, led the league in starts, and he barely got over 70. So I'm guessing that the Flames coaching staff will look to limit his starts. But of course, in order to do that, they need Eddie Lack or maybe one of their younger guys in the AHL to step up.
Again, another one of those instances where it is important to have a solid backup goaltender. And the last team we want to get to is the Edmonton Oilers. And the Oilers are another one of those teams that have surprised us, but in this instance, it hasn't been for the better. The Oilers, last year, making the playoffs for the first time in 10 years. It was a huge step forward. Connor McDavid coming on, having a fantastic season. And now they find themselves with the second worst record in the Western Conference behind only Arizona. Nick, what's going on with the Oilers?
Well, they are like Toronto in a way in that they had a really good year last year, and then the expectations just soared up. People expected Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl to score 2 or 3 points every game, and that would carry the team to the division championship, at least. Unfortunately, they can only do so much. They've picked it up lately with 2 consecutive games with overtime winners, one in Brooklyn, one in New Jersey. McDavid got the first, and then he made a slick pass to Draisaitl to win it. But the rest of the team is just not doing enough. The only other players that have done somewhat decent on the offensive end is Milan Lucic and Patrick Maroon.
Well, I think I had Ryan Nugent-Hopkins in that.
Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, I did forget him. Yeah, he's done very well as well, and they needed that from someone who they invested in a lot when he was 18. But the numbers don't lie. They're the worst offensive team in the league, and that's when you have guys like McDavid and Draisaitl on your team. That can't happen. You need to have a more balanced team, and we saw before the season began all the money that was thrown at Draisaitl and McDavid. People wondered, can they build a team around him? And so far, that's just not happening. Add on the fact that Cam Talbot isn't having nearly as big of a year as he did last year, and the success is just not going to be there.
Right. It's been a different start to the season than we certainly expected for the Edmonton Oilers. But again, as we've said multiple times, there's still a lot of hockey left to be played. There's still 90% of the season that hasn't started yet. So again, we might be singing a very different tune once even December or January rolls around.
And I still expect them to get things together and potentially contend for at least a wild card spot. But the division championship, it's going to be an uphill battle in order to get there.
Right now. And all of the 6 Edmonton Oilers away games have been decided by 1 goal. So really, a lot of it comes down to puck luck. And we've seen that can change in the matter of 1 game or in the matter of 5 seconds. So the Oilers season can turn around very quickly. And I really don't think that they have that much cause to be worried.
And if you've watched McDavid and some of his assists over the past few games, you know that all it takes is that, and it can go from getting 2 points and 0 points. But of course, he can't be the only one doing the work. He can only do so much.
Right. It's still a very interesting team to watch. And I think that's going to wrap it up here for us on the NHL Update. For Nick Veronesi, I'm Dylan Clark. Thank you for joining us.